our special guest, as well as David, who is serving in the role of both like guest speaker and co-host tonight. So I'm going to introduce both of them. So here we go. T. Rogers serves part-time as a celebrant, officiating, composing, and choreographing. That's the word. All types of ceremonies. I knew that didn't sound right. She works full time with Dignity Memorial as a funeral, cremation, and cemetery pre-planning advisor, helping families prepare in advance to reduce the stress and burden at the time a loss occurs. T's certifications for death care work include Certified Senior Advisor, or CSA, which is a specialist in working with older adults, NASP Certified CPSP Sales Professional, Neptune Memorial Reef Specialist, and CANA Certified Cremation Specialist. T is also an Insight Certified Funeral Celebrant. Her background includes founding and leading a humanist nonprofit and teaching diversity workshops on RSSI, which stands for Religious, Secular, and Spiritual Inclusion, during which time she established a secular safe zone and humanist services program and served as the humanist chaplain at the University of Central Florida. She delivered the first atheist invocation at the Florida legislature. She was named 2017 Humanist of the Year by the Florida Humanist Association and 2022 DEI Leader of the Year at the Orlando Pride in Business Awards, which is awesome. And for those of you who don't know David, David has also been working with T and others in RFR on this whole project around thinking about end of life issues, which he'll talk more about. And David is a mental health therapist and consultant, teaching how relationship is at the heart of our humanity. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attending a Bible college, and received a bachelor's in theology and psychology. During his studies there, David deconverted and has been on a journey of appreciating humanity and all the stories we create to build meaning and purpose. He has a master's in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology, and is currently focused on studying philosophy, ethics, and law. David has been actively working within the field of psychology as a therapist, social worker, consultant, and subject matter expert for over 15 years. In his spare time, David enjoys reading a lot. Feel free to look him up on Goodreads. You will feel bad about yourself after that if you like have a contest about how many books you're reading every year. Just FYI, he beats me every year. He also enjoys participating in fitness events and getting out into nature as much as possible. His business can be found at lifeweavings.com, and his writing can be followed and subscribed to at humanitiesvalues.com. David and T, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Your resumes are quite impressive. Wow. Thanks for sharing with us.
And thank you. And thank you,
yeah.
T, for being here. I'm excited. I mean, you and I have already been chatting a bit and, working a bit together, on the, little special project RFR has been working on. And we're here basically to talk about what I consider to be just an amazing workbook. Let's get this correct. It is the Identity Affirming Deathcare Directives workbook, the IADD. It is amazing. I've actually shared this with several clients since the second version came out, and they have loved it. It is just, at least in my little cohort, my little world, your praises are being sung through the hills. So thank you for creating this, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, David. I'm so grateful to be here tonight with all of you and to be able to talk about this project.
Yeah, awesome. So with that, I mean, we kind of got into your background a little bit, which admittedly, I was like, wow, okay, a lot bigger than even I knew about. So kind of filling in some of my own ignorance. You have been in this field generally quite a bit. Do you mind kind of giving us some, more specifics about the kind of professional educational background?
Yeah, so for about 15 years, I worked as a project and event manager at the University of Central Florida. That was my full-time job there, but while I was there, I also had the opportunity to get involved in some volunteer work. I was able to work on developing the Secular Safe Zone program and a Humanist and Secular Services program, and just do some intentional inclusion work for minority religious and secular identities on campus. So, for example, we were able to add non-religion as an explicitly protected class in our non-discrimination policy at the university, which I thought was really cool.
That's amazing. Okay. And well, and as most of us already are aware, the non-religious and certainly atheists identifying are still largely considered like below like murderers in respect in this country. I have some questions as to the polling on that. Although I will say that in the state of Washington, I did recently read that conservative Republicans are actually below atheists right now. So, which, yeah, they were clearly were winning the messaging service here, at least in the state of Washington. So that's just fun. Um, so, you know, with all of the work that you've done, you know, there's something here from the workbook. You know, it's right in the welcome section where it states that every person of every identity deserves to be authentically honored in death care.
Yes,
Which is
every dying person and every grieving person of every identity deserves equal compassion and to be authentically honored in death care.
love it. What inspired you to create this?
Well, after my 15 years at the university, I had an unexpected opportunity to find different employment, and I was at a career fair and learned about this job in the death care industry. Because of all my past work in diversity and doing diversity workshops and all of that, I wasn't at first really sure that I wanted to get into this career specifically because it was in sales, and I didn't think I wanted to go into something like that. But I researched how diverse identities experience the death care industry. And I was just heartbroken by some of the stories that I found, people really experiencing challenges at one of the worst times of their lives. So I wanted to see if I might be able to make a difference in this space. I guess there are identities, and I specifically focus on LGBTQIA plus and diverse religious, secular, and spiritual identities. But anyone who faces discrimination and othering in daily life, I guess so many people don't think about planning ahead for death care in general because it's a difficult topic, let alone how identity might impact death care decisions and the experience of death care. So that's
Absolutely.
myself into this mess.
Yeah. You know, it's something that, you know, when looking over, you know, the workbook and some of the conversations, you know, inspired from you, you know, it's, you know, it's something you still kind of get choked up a little bit around, you know, own personal loss, um, the process of going through that just with, you know, doctors and family. And it is something that's easy to dismiss, ignore until it's flat out just smacking you upside the head. And so when you talk about like the death care and the industry around it, what are some of the roles that are bound in that, just so we can be a little more specific with people?
Yeah, so the public facing roles are going to be things like your pre-planning advisors, like myself, who meet with families before a loss occurs, and your funeral directors, who are there to care for loved ones when they come into the care of the funeral home. Also, people that you're going to be working with potentially at cemeteries. But when we talk about like death care and the public thinks about death care, that's also going to include roles. The public will perceive that as including roles like people who are working in hospice care and in hospitals, because these are people that are going to be part of that death care process.
Okay. So when working in your own role in collecting stories and kind of in developing this, what do you find is some of the most like common difficulties that people have when kind of discussing and contemplating these decisions?
So in general, I think maybe fear of the unknown, not really sure what to think about death, but also, as you had already mentioned, David, past experience with grief may prevent,
Mm.
people from wanting to engage in the conversation. Um, and some people just focusing on life. But when you said that, a story kind of popped into my head. Um, one of the challenges that people of diverse identities face is coming out, right? And we all know what that is. That is the ongoing and continuous process of having to share an identity with someone when they don't know what that identity is and when you don't know how they're going to react to that. So I had spoken with someone who was in a situation that um, they had to come out to a funeral director to let them know that now their daughter, they didn't want their daughter dead named, they didn't want the birth gender used, and they
Yeah.
wanted to be wearing a dress in the casket. And they said that in that moment, coming out to that funeral director, all that they could think was, how is their daughter's body going to be treated by that funeral director and by other funeral home staff now that they've shared that with them?
Yeah.
So I think it is a very difficult conversation for all people, and there are reasons that all people have difficulty with that conversation. But when it comes to people of these diverse identities who experience challenges, I think there's a lot more on top of all of that.
Definitely. Well, and it's the last, the way your parts of that story, this reminds me, in some ways, it's the last truly intimate thing that any of us, even though, most of probably audience here, doesn't believe necessarily in a soul or anything like that, there is still that, like, we don't think about it that way, but we do in the process of thinking about these decisions, we are looking ahead at what do we want this to be treated as? Because this is at least a big part of who I am. This is how I interact with the world. And how would were I able to see what was going on, how would I still be respected in that last time? And little wonder it's so fraught with these types of questions. So is that in a situation like that, would would that be a part where you or somebody in a similar role might be able to step in and help out with in that conversation? Or
I think that it would be nice if there were enough advocates in this world, and if the people who needed them knew that they were there to help.
right,
So certainly, if there were someone in our community here who needed a person to walk with them through the process and be present for them, I could do that. But I think there's a lot of people out there who just don't know that there even is anyone to call or any way to think about this in advance.
right. Well, and I know at least in the therapeutic side, um, it's a bit of a niche I don't, to be perfectly honest, I don't know, keep in contact with a ton of therapists personally. Um, but even within that, I know of only two that specialize in end of life decisions, hospice care clients and those in that kind of population. Um, and because it's just one, it's can be harrowing, and the boundaries can be very difficult to hold on to. Um, so what, in the middle of all of this, what have you found with people you've worked with that, religion or really ideology of any kind, how does that play a role in some of these discussions?
That is a really great question, David, and I think it's really important. So, everyone has a religious, secular, or spiritual identity, and how that informs our death care decisions is very personal, but is for some people a very significant part of that decision making. And I think it's important that really people do consider the religious, cultural, and family traditions that they have when they're thinking about their death care decisions so that they know they feel aligned with those decisions. And also thinking about whether their loved ones are going to feel aligned with the decisions that they make. Or if not in alignment with those traditions or religions, at least the decisions are intentional and known to everyone. Um, some factors might include things like a person's belief or non-belief in an afterlife or a guiding being or a cognizant presence they want to honor. And of course, a person's religious or secular belief in purpose and meaning, and what that has to do with their decisions. I think the complicated one is the community standards, right? The community expectations. So a culture or religious community may have or even dictate some traditions, such as whether to choose cremation or casketed burial or specific things about the final resting place. But the other side to that coin is that a person may not want to do those traditions, but they might feel really pressured to do that, and
Hmm.
really concerned about asking questions about other alternatives. I've had people ask me, if I asked you about this, is this going to get back to my church?
Oh my. Okay. Okay. So that would, I just think the pressure behind that. I mean, you find also, I'd imagine anyway, that similar, almost both ends where, it's like often certain ceremonies like marriages or whatnot. It's like, oh, we have to do this because of, familial pressure and don't really want anybody to know. Um, and yet this is this is your time. And now at the end of life, yet again, the pressure, even when the you that is you is not really even around anymore, the pressure still exists. And as is already being shared in the chat, it's like the number of times that funerals are then used, even for somebody who was an avowed secularist, as a means of proselytizing, is frankly, I would very much say disrespectful, but also just way too often. Uh, is that so? Is that something that, um, speaking of then like funeral arrangements and how that is handled, um, I know I know the IADD kind of goes into it a bit. Is that something that is, I mean, are we talking about legally binding stuff here, or is it more like, hey, this is what I would really like, almost a personal directive. Like we'd really like this to happen, but ultimately, it's not enforceable outside of people's integrity.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a book to document your wishes.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of things that you might want to think about talking to a lawyer about. One of those might be assigning a death care surrogate.
Hmm.
So you all know what a healthcare surrogate is, right? That's someone that can make your healthcare decisions when you are incapacitated. And your durable power of attorney is someone who can make your legal and financial decisions when you're incapacitated. But those authorities end when you pass away. So if you are someone who is estranged from your family or who doesn't feel like your family might honor your wishes and who you are, and you want to designate someone else to be your person who is your death care surrogate or has control of your disposition or whatever you want to call it, you really need to do that with a lawyer. And there is a
Huh.
form in the book for designating a death care surrogate, but I just want to caution everyone that in different states, there are different regulations for how that works. And in most cases, the funeral home is just always going to work with the next of kin. And so
Right.
you have some way to counter that. And the person that you've designated as death care surrogate needs to have some kind of way to assert themselves if the funeral home says, no, we're not going to honor that.
Okay. To be honest, I had no idea that role even existed before reading this and talking with you. Um, is do you know if is that something that could like be placed into somebody's will, like as part of what is happening post death?
I would generally, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give
Yeah, I would I want to throw out the
but
caveat.
I
This is not, yeah.
advise people not to put it in the will
Mm,
because technically the will's not going to be valid until it goes through probate.
mm,
So, just to make sure that there's not going to be any challenges with that, you could do that as a separate document, the lawyer. And there is a
gotcha.
surrogate form in the IADD,
Hmm.
downloadable separately. But again, I would suggest that you review that with someone to make sure that the people will be able to assert that.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of this is broad directives, kind of, reminders of things to keep up with when approaching this, so that it's like every state's a little different. So definitely want to make sure that you're looking into that. Okay. Okay. Um, do you have any other, notions, things that have come up that have kind of um served as limitations to, beyond perhaps even like, oh, don't, like, please don't let my church find out about this, um but families or other issues or even ignorance for that matter, like what are we even able to do with our bodies at the end?
Yeah, I think I don't know. There are just a lot of challenges. I
Yeah.
cannot tell you how many people told me that their loved one's death was ruined, just ruined by well-meaning chaplains or health or death care providers who forced their religious perspective on people.
Hmm.
And some people say that those, um, those will come whether they argue or not. They keep telling them, please don't come visit us. And they'll keep coming back and visiting and sharing the
Yeah.
religious message and trying to save them before they pass.
Right.
Um, but others say, they don't speak up. Like, we hear so often in the secular community that people just don't say anything about what they're going through because they're afraid of how they're going to be treated, how their loved one is
Hmm.
going to be treated, and, how they're going to be judged if they try to come out and say, I don't really want this religious messaging around me or this religious language. So that's one thing we specifically went into in the IADD was making sure that you had a space to say, how you feel about that for yourself and your family. That way they at least have the meat of something that comes from you saying, this is not something that I want in my life. Because no one should have to pray to or defer to someone else's God or gods in their time of grief. And I think, knowledge can be a challenge, but lack of knowledge about identity related death care preferences can also be a big challenge. There was someone I worked with some time ago. She lost her dad a long time ago, but a couple of years after he passed, she learned that because of his faith, she shouldn't have had him embalmed. So she knew he wanted casketed burial and she had honored that, but she didn't know that piece. So it was tortuous for her. She felt like she had really dishonored him and done something horrible that she could never undo. She could never take back. So a lot is having those conversations with loved ones. Another part is making sure that you trust your death care providers. And, when you plan ahead, you can kind of heavily vet them and make sure they're going to be affirming and that they're educated about your identity, and that they can make sure you know all of your options. So, if you're a veteran who's a Muslim, you want to make sure that you're with a provider that can tell you that the grave might not be able to be aligned with Mecca if you use a national cemetery. There are some things that if you don't have an affirming provider, you don't have someone that's educated about your identity, they might not be able to give you good guidance.
That's a good point. Well, and that's where, I like that the fact that you bring up, say veteran is Muslim, and just as a recognition that whether or not we agree with certain perspectives that some people have, the shared quality of at times in end of life care being outside the norm, outside of the societal um, declared standard, that we have some solidarity in noting, hey, we're not being treated the same, and whatever we are wanting. I mean, you mentioned the words like an affirming provider and an educated. What is, and I know you go into that with the workbook. What's the difference as you see it between those two?
Well, I mean, an affirming provider is someone that you can feel comfortable coming out to. They're not going to judge you for who you are. They're comfortable with your identity. But just because someone welcomes you for who you are doesn't mean that they're educated about your identity needs, right? They might be, very happy to welcome you as a Wiccan, but they might not want to tell you about natural burial options, or it might not know that you need natural burial options to be given to you. And just because someone says, I'll take anybody's money, that doesn't mean that they are the best provider to trust with your care and the care of your grieving loved ones.
Right. Okay. Shoot, just that answer alone is already, I mean, I know letting me know, and any number of people who are, listening, watching right now, going, wait, this is complicated. And that is not meant to be, it's like, it's not making light of this. This is, there's a lot going on here that, frankly, the weight of it, and in fact, actually want to just a moment to acknowledge that this is a hell of a weighty topic. And so a lot of, seeing some of the stories that are being shared in the chat already, like this is not something that, and my go-to, of course, is always humor to deal with stuff. I've sought therapy about it. And it's just, but it is one of those things where at one level, it is good to make light, and at the same time, never to ignore the fact that this is an important aspect of our lives, and further how we're working with one another. Um, and just a kind of reiteration, if people are finding this difficult to listen to, it's sparking some difficulty, like definitely just a reminder to reach out to the support groups, reach out to, mental health specialists, like, be sure to reach out and talk with somebody. Um, Not that we don't want to hide from this, but we also want to acknowledge that this is hard. Um, so just, yeah, we're here. Um, and so between the affirming and education, which I love that distinction, maybe like a person can be affirming, person can be like, I am supportive of you, and have no knowledge really. They have no idea what they're talking about. What when it comes to that, I'll readily admit, like I can be like, I'm here for you, and my ignorance just came up and smacked me. Like this is just the way it is because there's so much out there. Do you know of like other trainings or how did you learn so much? I mean, some of the information just kind of rolls off your tongue is amazing to me. Is this kind of like a lifetime of dedication to learning? Is there particular trainings involved or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the background in DEI and then getting in, I'm fully immersed in the death care industry with my role and what I do. So having those two things together, I mean, this is what I do. This is what I think about all the time. There are not currently um, any specific trainings around this,
Hmm.
although I don't know if you've ever heard of an organization called SAGE or SAGE Care. They are developing a health and death care professional training for LGBTQIA plus, and they're
Okay.
more done for maybe a secular safe zone style training for health and death care professionals as well.
Mhm. Fabulous. Okay. All right. So definitely a place that needs more, um, well, more involvement. Uh, Absolutely. Okay. So when, so we've got it. We definitely have a few questions, good, but that people have asked. But kind of working through this, what would you say are like three of the central things? Like if you had to, the pamphlet, I think is, I don't know, 20 pages, give or take, and kind of going like, what if you had three things you wanted people to be left with, going, hey, these are things to be paying attention to. What would those be?
So the first one, um, know thyself is the universal starting point, right? So just kind of understanding your own values and your own wishes and that of your loved ones. And that can take a bit of self-reflection and discussion to get to that. The second is budget. There is
Hmm.
going to be a cost to final arrangements. So we each have to decide what value these plans have for us, for our loved ones, and for future generations, and what we want to be able to invest in that. And then the third one is choosing affirming providers, right? Think think ahead, plan ahead. Um, you know, there are lots of different tools out there that you can use. The identity affirming death care directives was intended to fill a gap because the other tools out there don't specifically talk about how identity informs our death care decisions.
Hmm.
But just making sure that your family knows what your plan is. And then when you do decide on funeral home, cemetery, whatever that is for you, crematory, just make sure that they are a place that is going to be able to honor your wishes once you know what those are.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me a bit. of, when talking with clients around grief and noting that grief is not necessarily about the loss of what has come before, but the loss of a future that will no longer be. And it strikes me, it's just this moment actually, that these directives and figuring out how our end of life decisions are made and honored helps set that future on a path. I mean, we can't control those outcomes, but we can influence. And in helping other people in their own grieving of the loss of what they no longer will have with us, that we can still be there in a way to provide that kind of like, hey, if we're not thinking about it just about ourselves, we're also thinking about the people we've left behind. Hence, one of the questions from the poll, and this just seems to be one of the way of being able to help with that, not only their with their grief. Yeah. Thank you, T. Yeah, I have to admit this hit me a little harder than I thought it was going to be. Even in prepping for this, it's always one of those things when that comes up. So before we kind of go to some of the questions from people, which I know they're there, as well as a few comments that we might kind of address, any last thoughts? Any besides those three things? Like, hey, this would kind of sparked you?
No, I just again want to say that I'm so grateful to be here and having this conversation with everyone. I know that it is a hard conversation, but I just think that it's so important, not only for ourselves, but for the people around us. I always think of, on there's this scale of discrimination experience, right? So we all might have the same identity, but we don't all experience it the same way. And there are some people who don't have any challenges with it and, don't have any problems at all. But there are other people who lose everything and who just have, horrible experiences. And those are the people that we need to speak for, that we need to help, and that we need to wrap our arms around and do whatever we can to uplift them.
That is beautifully said. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
continue to be one of the most
great.
amazing people I've ever met. It's wonderful talking with you. I think we have certainly a few questions
We
and
do.
comments. Yeah.
We do. And I know one of the comments that I want to touch on real quick is that both of y'all, T and David, have been working on our death care team here at Recovering from Religion. And this is something that we are actively thinking about and trying to have ways to provide resources to folks who are thinking about this. And this workbook is certainly a fantastic example of something that people can access when thinking about these issues. And I'm going to just drop the link one more time. And I'm going to put the link in here that goes straight to the workbook. And I was wondering, T, would you be able to kind of walk us through if someone goes and clicks on the link and goes to the workbook and wants to use it, what are they going to encounter and how should they approach it? Like, is this something you do by yourself in an afternoon? Is it something you want to do in consultation with other people, whether members of your family or professionals? How do we get started? What do we do with this?
So I think there's a lot of different ways that people could use the book. It might be just kind of a self-reflection and walking through those identity thoughts and what might come up for you. It might be a group conversation with family. And I've had some mental health professionals say that it's something that they want to use with their clients. So I think there are a lot of different ways that you can use it. There are a lot of sections in that book that's intentional because there's a lot of different things that we need to think about, but not all of those sections are going to be meaningful to everyone. So, just skip over what doesn't feel important to you and focus on what is going to make a difference.
Okay, so you don't necessarily have to sit down and fill it out from like page 1 to 20 or 48. Um, you can do the sections that are relevant and just use those.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, that is good to know because I'm one of those people that will, see the assignment and try to do the assignment. And I'm glad to know that I don't have to do all of it if I don't need to. Okay, that's helpful. And I know David already kind of asked about this, but once you've done it, does it make sense to have it saved in multiple places, or like where, just generally speaking, like I know I have a will. I did it when I was like 21. I'm not sure anyone would be able to find it if I was, suddenly raptured tomorrow. Just kidding, I'm not going to be. But if something were to happen, like um is there like a place to put things like this? Like, do you label it in a folder in your filing cabinet? Do you have any advice for what to do with these kinds of things? For like, I know there's the legal process, but also just like the kind of practical process of what do we do?
Well, I mean, you're going to have any, you know, manuals or workbooks like this that you've filled out. You're going to have your contracts with crematories or funeral homes or cemeteries. You're going to have your will and estate planning documents, your death care surrogate, your, 5 wishes, all the different things that you might have. It's really important that whoever is going to be responsible for handling those things has a copy or knows how to get a copy. And some people will put them in a safety deposit box, but then no one can access it until there's a death certificate available. So just making sure that however you do keep those, that they are accessible to the people who need them. Another thing I always point out to the families that I serve is, you think about the person who's going to be handling your arrangements, but what if that person weren't available? Or
Mm,
something happened to that person. So think, a couple steps out from one person.
okay, good to know. Well, I'm definitely working on it, and I am really glad to know that I'm not like, 48 pages from completion. I might be almost done. Who knows? But this is so helpful. I have loved going through this and filling out pages, kind of like y'all were talking about, where I wouldn't have thought about mentioning this, but I'm glad that it's here written down because like I know what I'm thinking inside of my head, but who knows who's going to be planning the services and what they're going to have in mind. So I love that this is making things explicit. Like here's my name, here's the name I want you to call me in the service, or whatever. Here's how I want to be presented. This is great. I'm really excited for this and have been thinking for years I should probably update my will, but wasn't really sure what to do. This is it. Okay. Let's see. Other than that, is there anything else that you want to refer people to before we go to other questions? Any other resources or links that you want to share other than obviously the workbook itself, which we are linking in the show notes?
The one of the people that was integral in helping with this, there were several. Rebecca DePontes was someone who did her doctoral research on the IADD and did some surveying and just some wonderful contributions. And then Jennifer Wright Berryman is with Equal Death Care. And if you just do a Google search for Equal Death Care, you'll find it. I think it's equaldeathcare.org. They are putting together resources for LGBTQIA plus and religious, secular, and spiritual identities to be able to access related to death care inclusion.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, yeah, and I'm dropping that link in here too, equaldeathcare.org. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing this
I think
with
that's
us. And yeah, yeah, this is great. And I mean, I don't know if you've been following along in the chat, but lots of people have been sharing their stories and their experiences of having a family member or a friend or a loved one that passed away, and then going to a service and either not being something that they felt like the person would have appreciated it, like it's religious or it's proselytizing and the person was an atheist, or thinking now about a loved one and wondering what would I do if my loved one passed and I have other siblings or family members who I think would want to make the service be a certain way. Maybe they want to have it have a religious character to it, and I know that's not what this person would want. Is this workbook something that is intended to address that, where the person can make explicit, these are my wishes, please don't make it a fire and brimstone altar call ceremony?
Yeah. Um, After a loss occurs, it can be very difficult for families. I have seen fist fights over whether mom was going to wear glasses in a casket, because the small things can become such major things at that time of great stress. So, yes, I mean, the more you detail your wishes before your loss occurs, the greater that gift is to your family, that they're not having to guess and second guess themselves on what they chose for you.
Mm, that's fantastic. Okay, I love this. This is a great idea. So I got to tell you, I'm the same way. I've done some work in dispute resolution in the past, and there is nothing like the family drama that happens after a death. It's just it reaches a whole nother plane of experience from what ordinarily people will say and do. So I absolutely appreciate your work here to help people kind of circumvent that. Okay. Well, before we go to questions, let's share the poll results. Um, let's see. Let me pull those up and we can comment on these if you like. So, okay, here are the results from the poll. At the beginning, we asked, how much does death or dying worry you? And 13% of people selected a lot. 31% of people said, eh, maybe some. 56% of people, by far the greatest amount, said that they're more worried about the process than the end itself, which, yeah, that makes sense to me. Does that ring familiar for you, T, given your experience in the field, or how does this stack up to your usual experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are definitely more concerned about, that the pain and suffering that might be involved in the dying process, as well as the loss of control and other
Mhm.
aspects.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so another question that we asked was, have you considered how your death would affect others? And most people, or the highest amount of people, 38% said definitely. Then 19% said it's the only thing I worry about. 13% of people said, no, I'm gonna be dead. What do I care? Which I totally get that. And 31% of people said, I hope people will celebrate my life after I'm gone. And I noticed in the death care workbook, that's actually one of the kind of types of ceremonies that's mentioned that people can select from, like a celebration of life, and that there are various like characteristics that people can have to their ceremonies. I would love to know your thoughts on which ones do you find, I don't know, tend to be the most, I don't want to say meaningful to people, but I don't know, I don't want to say there's a best one or a worst one. I'm sure it's contextual, but do you notice that certain kinds of ceremonies tend to hit a little better than others, or leave people better off than others?
Well, I think that is very personal, and what comforts someone, comes from their traditions and their values and their heart. A lot of people are moving more towards, a less traditional format of a ceremony. Those words that people use to describe ceremonies, memorials, funerals, celebration of life, a lot of people use them interchangeably.
Mm.
I think when we think about a celebration of life, we try to think about focusing on, what that person brought to our lives and to the lives of others, and what they contributed to the world, and to celebrate that rather than focusing on our own grief. So it gets us more external focused than internal focused.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is so interesting. You're the second person I've known who has worked in this field. I did have a previous coworker whose family owned a crematorium, I guess, like we used to call them funeral parlors, which that name disturbs me. Like, why is it a parlor? Do we still use that term, or is that's outdated, right? Sorry, I don't know. Just nodding knowingly, like, I'm sorry, Kara said that out loud.
It does bring up an image of like a wood bar kind of thing, and
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's a little weird.
I don't love it. I don't love it. Is there a term that is more commonly used for like the place where you go to meet with the death care professional and have the ceremony? What do we call those places now?
So generally funeral home,
Funeral home. Okay.
but there are some that are moving towards, talking about themselves as a life event center rather than just a funeral home,
Oh,
um, and renaming their rooms from chapels to, event rooms or venue rooms.
okay. Kind of to expand the types of ceremonies and remembrances and celebrations that could happen there.
Yeah, and also I think, to honor that, not everyone wants that traditional funeral home where you walk in and there's crosses on the walls and Bibles on the halls, and
Yeah.
that it's really there for everyone and to support everyone.
Okay. It's not like the scene of a spooky miniseries or something.
Right.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Moving on to poll question 3, which was, what is your favorite death deity? Of the ones that we listed, only Osiris got any votes, which is, of course, the Egyptian god of the underworld, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and yeah, I'm really glad nobody picked the ones that I had so much difficulty pronouncing, so I don't have to say those again. But 92% of people selected something else, and I saw a few in the chat. Let's see, we've got Hypnos, we had Sandman earlier, and I think a few others got in there. That was fun. I love when people share those. Do you have a favorite, T and David?
I think I love, it's kind of like in my bio says about, the exploration of people's stories. It's like, it's why I love this question. I mean, the answers there are pulled directly from like Wikipedia. This is not, some deep, like, here are the major ones. Because, the relationship that we have with our own end of life is as much about the stories we want to leave behind as they are the stories that we're currently living with. And to me, that's part of mythology. I mean, there's at least, shoot, for that matter, there's at least some theories out there that look at the very development of religion itself as being primarily tied to early death rituals and in how people still believe they were talking with, their past loved ones and leaders in their community and tribe. And so, so this is part and parcel of who we are as human beings, and we don't have to, I mean, abjectly agree with, certainly I'm not going to be a proselyte for Osiris. It's more of like, in the development of our stories about how we look at, yes, very much, the so-called traditional, or big three of, Christian, Jewish, Muslim God does not have the market cornered on how we discuss these things and how we relate to it. And I've literally encountered people who, um, actually incorporate Greek mythology into their lives. Not in any sense that they actually believe Zeus and all the rest of them actually exist, but in the sense of going, hey, we're literally making this stuff up. So why not, try out some different things, and just as a way of, building ritual into our lives in various ways. And you don't have to agree with it to just appreciate this is how we, develop meaning. So, if anything, have some fun with it.
I like it. Yeah, I'm glad that you put it that way too, because I think, this is a serious topic, certainly, but, does it have to be so serious? I think that there's room for, I don't want to say that. No, I'm going to say there's room for humor and enjoyment. I think there is. That's me. Maybe that's a controversial take, but like I'm thinking back to I used to live in Japan for a while, and I had this really fantastic language conversation partner from Kyoto, and we were talking one time, and she was telling me, I think we were following some script of, different conversation topics to help you build vocabulary, and one of them was talking about these spirits in Japanese folklore and mythology called yokai, that I thought were very cute. She started showing me images of them, and I was like, these aren't scary. These are adorable. I love these. And she ended up buying me a pair of socks that had the little yokai characters on them. It was the best thing ever, and we had a great laugh about it. And I just think it's okay to, have fun with things, and that was a great experience. So I don't know what made me think of that, but I think it's okay to have fun with things too. T, what are your thoughts on that? How serious should we be taking this? What, ground us here.
So I try to take my cues from the families that I serve and the people that I'm talking to. But always, as a professional in death care, I want to be mindful of, how I'm doing that. But,
Mhm.
People, there are lots of people who deal with it very humorously, and other people that they just don't see any humor in it at all. And some of that may have to do with the point in their lives that they are, right? And what
Mhm.
they're going through in that moment.
That's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. You want to be respectful of the people that are here experiencing the grief, for sure. Um, I hope that when I go, people can laugh when I'm gone, and don't be sad. But that's, I was about to say that's a tall order, but like, you know what? That may be taking myself a little too seriously. Anyway, that's actually a great segue into some of the questions we got. But before, we have to read the results for this final poll question. How fantastic is the Deadpool Wolverine movie? Well, 20% of people said incredible, 13% said insanely incredible, 20% said Hugh Jackman abs, that is all. And 80% said, what are you talking about? So, some people haven't seen the film yet.
Pop
Um,
culture, people, come on.
yeah, come on. At least we didn't ask you about Star Trek, because I was in my mind, I was already thinking about like which Star Trek character's death ceremony did you most like?
Right?
And, there's Spock, there's that
Mm.
time those two characters in the Next Generation, they didn't die, but everybody thought they died, and then I think Geordi had to plan their funeral. Anyway, we didn't ask you that. We asked you about a different movie. Anyway, moving on to the questions. So let's go to the questions. Okay, so we actually had some that I think are a good segue from what we were just talking about. Someone was asking, what have your experiences been, and how do you work with neurodivergent decedents and bereaved? Or is there kind of a difference in how you would approach that, and what kinds of things would you consider?
So that is an excellent question. You know, there's diversity of all kinds. And I would, you know, personally, I have had experience in my personal life with neurodivergent individuals. So I have, you know, some experience to bring to the table. But if your family needs to make sure that they can be accommodated, you know, then they need to ask intentional questions of that provider to make sure, you know, like if you're bringing people to a funeral ceremony and they're very sensitive to smells, you walk into a funeral home and they have, you know, these chemical air fresheners plugged in all over the place, that can be very difficult. You know, and also making sure that there are ways that, you know, we're not making the whole ceremony overstimulating to people. If we need to create pauses, if we need to create separate spaces for people. But the funeral home is not going to know what is needed. The family really needs to share with the funeral home what's going to be needed for them.
Hmm.
Good to know. Okay. Um, let's see, we've got another question here asking, how do you handle situations where the person who is deceased was religious, but they were estranged from their non-religious family members, or vice versa? And maybe there's not a lot of conversation that's taken place between them, or a lot of knowledge and understanding about what the person's wishes might have been.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kara, you keep freezing.
Oh, sorry. Should I say it again?
No. I think I got your question. So, you know, if a person has a religious, secular, or spiritual identity that's different from their family, and they've been estranged from that family because of that difference, how do we handle that? Was that the question?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so again, that's going to be very personal. You know, if this is a family that doesn't know anything about their decedent loved one's wishes, then they're going to need to make that decision. Is this service that they're planning about, you know, primarily about honoring the person who has been lost? Or is it primarily there to give comfort to those, you know, who are going to be at the service? And then, you know, there are professional celebrants out there and just wonderful people who can create custom ceremonies that honor the life of the loved one. And there may not be they may not be religious. They may include a religious reading if somebody wants to have that. But at the end of the day, it's really about remembering the person who was lost. And by the end of the ceremony, people don't even realize that it's not a traditional ceremony. They've just experienced something new and very personalized and uplifting. So just thinking about alternative ways to do ceremonies, especially for families that are pluralistic, that are, you know, diverse in their perspectives, so that people, all the people who are there, can be comforted and get value out of being there for that service, because they all loved that person, whether they shared their religious, secular, spiritual identity or not.
I
Okay.
think
And go ahead, David.
well that seems to go into, like, we've had a couple of questions and scenarios presented in the chat around, um, it's like part of the family's religious, part of it isn't. One is going to be upset with, and we're not going to be able to address, simply because every situation is going to be unique and, as you've stated, T, personal. Um, all the more reason to have as many of our wishes made known ahead of time, and where possible, to, in fact, you just mentioned, a kind of professional celebrant, somebody who, it's like a wedding planner. And, it's like somebody here who can, navigate, who probably has a background in, hostage negotiation, who, can, figure out how to, juggle all of the, the competing interests here. And even then, at the end of the day, I mean, we're not going to make everybody happy, which, I mean, a little macabre humor. At least we don't have to worry about it anymore. So there's that.
Yeah, I love that. I fall strongly in the camp of like, once I'm gone, I'm not gonna care anymore. I'm not gonna know what you do. Do what works for y'all. But I know that's not everyone's uh, views on it, and we can't assume that that's everyone's views on it. And I guess that's what
Mhm.
makes it really tough too, is not knowing or having different ideas that are competing with one another.
And
Um,
having, letting people know that, if it comforts them, it's okay for someone to say a prayer at the service is very different from having an evangelical service or having a blessing of your body that doesn't align with your identity. Um,
Oh, that's a great point. Have you seen any services where it was just kind of a mixture of different types of belief systems or ritual practices all just happening sort of simultaneously or in the same space?
Generally, when a family is left to plan on their own, there's one tradition and they do whatever that is. But if you have a celebrant and they know that there are multiple traditions, then they can incorporate things into that ceremony to, at least honor and acknowledge the diverse people that are there at the service.
Love that. I want everyone to get a pair of those socks of the little cute
Are you
spirits
okay?
at my funeral. Also, we're having a scavenger hunt. But anyway, that's gonna write that into the thing. It's fine. There's a terrible movie about that. It's awful. Uh, okay, sorry. Back to serious questions. Um, do we have any more questions? Actually, I think we've gone through most of the ones that I collected. We've got a couple of more minutes, if there are any more. David, did you notice any others in the chat, or have any that you'd like to follow up with? Oh, here's one. But David, go ahead if you have something.
There was one concerning, the utility perhaps of the workbook being applied to like military families.
Mm.
So, David, help me understand what we're trying to get at with that question.
Yeah, no, that's good point. I think, part of it, and whoever it was a while back in the chat. So whoever, pointed that out, by all means, state it again. But I, figure it has something to do with, particularly when it comes to military funerals, and perhaps some of this may be just outside of, again, you're not a lawyer, but tend to be rather conservative. There's definitely some pre-done, pre-established ritual elements to it, and that would this still be kind of applicable to, at least then still, I'm probably already answering the question a bit, but in filling this out, and even when dealing with a bit more ritualized end of life care, that, hey, I know that there's going to be some things that are going to be part of the process, but here are some things that I would like to add or tweak if possible.
Yeah, I'm trying to turn to the page now. I have a physical copy of the book with me.
Yeah.
That I did in here on veteran considerations. And really, it's just to make sure that people know that when, for example, you're going to a military cemetery, there are lots of different emblems you can have put on your marker. It's not just emblems. So there's the humanist symbol and there's the Wiccan symbol. Like there's all different kinds of things there. So I encourage veterans to think about their identity and how they want to be honored, and just make sure that they know that they're able to do that.
I found the question.
Good
as
point.
Could this workbook extend to assist with services prohibited to military funerals? Oftentimes, it's a hassle to get appropriate identity or religious changes made in the service members' records for after their death, and this notebook could be a massive help to those in the armed forces. Yeah. That was a specific question, so I found it.
So I mean, it can be difficult. I am not a military specialist. With veterans, I'm really just trying to make sure that they are able to maximize their burial benefits, and understand what those are, and think about, how their identity is going to inform those choices. But there certainly are times when, that if somebody doesn't want certain rituals or certain things to happen, that the funeral director needs to know so that they don't get ordered.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. So here's another question, and this one is kind of very specific. I would be interested to hear your take on this, and if the person who asked it wants to put more details in the chat too, please do. They're asking, if someone is agnostic and their family is atheist, is it inappropriate to ask that an agnostic aspect is included in the service? And I'm wondering what that would look like. What might be the differences between an agnostic sort of ceremony versus an atheist ceremony? Have you seen that before? Do you have any thoughts on that, T? And whoever was asking the question too.
I would kind of think through whether we are an epistemological agnostic, where we're not sure, that we as finite beings can have knowledge of a greater being, of an infinite being, or are we truly agnostic in that we don't believe there is a God or isn't a God? And I think part of that question, the way I take it, is, if your family is solidly atheist, they may not want any of those elements there. But if you are an epistemological agnostic, you may actually believe there is a God, and you may want that acknowledged in your service.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting.
Excellent. Huh. Yeah, that makes sense. And I am assuming that the answer to, is it inappropriate to ask that, whatever aspect is included, probably it's not inappropriate to ask for that if that reflects your belief and your position.
Yeah, I don't think it's inappropriate to, reflect on whatever your identity is and how you would want that honored in your death care. It may be important that you have that conversation with your family so that you understand what's important to them as well.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, all right. Let's see. Do we have any other questions, David or anyone else who may have collected any that came in directly, or anything else that you would like to comment on, T, before we wrap up?
No, just thank you so much for having this conversation, and thank you to all of you for being here in this space to talk about this, because it really is important to think about, and I'm so grateful that you've taken this time to do this.
Well,
thank you. Definitely. Yeah. This has been a heck of a conversation, and very much I hope it's not the last one. I think I've already noted a couple of people in the chat have said we need more conversations about this.
Yeah.
And I will second that. Is something we should be not afraid to bring up.
I agree. Oh, and
Thank
I am seeing a great kind of follow-on question to wrap us up with on that, given
you.
that T, you work with this on a daily basis. What do you do to take care of yourself, given the subject matter that you're working with?
Well, I do a lot of volunteer work, and uh, that just helps me. It helps me center, and it helps me stay connected to other people in a positive way and keep
Mm.
positivity as part of my life.
I love that. And okay, I've got one final one, and then I promise we'll stop peppering you with questions. But given that you made this workbook, and I'm guessing that you might have filled one out for yourself. Um, is there anything that you would be comfortable sharing with us that you included in yours that might be unique to you, or something not too personal? You don't have to share anything that you don't want to share with the whole internet, but given that you work with this on the daily, is there anything that you've seen that you thought, oh man, I definitely want to include this in whatever happens after I pass, or any kind of cool ideas that you've taken on that you want to keep?
Well, I don't know about cool ideas, but I will share that I have, um, I've had a will for a very long time. I have healthcare surrogates, and I have a death care surrogate, and that's all something that I've done. I have final arrangement plans. I have cemetery plans. I'm going to be scattered at Neptune Memorial Reef, which is the world's only under ocean cremation mausoleum, which is so cool. Um,
That qualifies as a cool idea you found.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't share anything too personal here, but I think that, it is important people know that I stand behind this and I do it. Like I think it's important to think ahead, and I have done this myself.
Awesome.
Fabulous.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and for
Yeah.
sharing all of this with us. And I completely agree with everyone here this evening. This is definitely a conversation we should continue having, and I hope that we can keep talking about it more in the future. So thank you for that. And we'll go ahead and start wrapping up and head into the hangout. T, are you planning to stick around at all for the hangout? No pressure either way. Totally up to you if you want to stick around or not.
Oh, I'm curious what this is all about, so I'll stick.
Absolutely. Who wouldn't want to stick around and learn about Hugh Jackman's abs? Also, the Death Care Workbook. We do serious things and have fun here.
They are
Okay.
both very super important.
Yes. All right. Well then, stick around, everyone. We'll wrap up and move to the hangout here in just a few minutes. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, T. Thank you, David. Thank you, Nikki and Gail and Daryl and Glenda and Jason and Helen and Rob for making this all happen, and the pre-production team and the post-production team and everybody else and everyone for attending. We wouldn't be here every week if it wasn't for everyone helping us make it happen, and everyone showing up and hanging out with us. So thank you for indulging us, and hopefully it has been useful too. And please join us next week. We're here every Monday. Next week we have Nick Dowlett, who will be talking about 4 disciplines for having impossible conversations. It's going to be really good. I am excited for this one. We also have coming up Phil Ferguson, Rebecca Hensler, Forrest Valkai, our very own Helen Green. And she's also going to be continuing a conversation about death. And we're having a few more topics about this coming up. We also have Coleman Watts. So it's going to be good. Keep coming back if you like what you're seeing. And David, would you like to tell people where they can find us on the social medias?
Absolutely. And in fact, I'll make a plug for next week's conversation with Nick. Nick and I go way back. He's a great guy and a lot of fun to talk with. So highly recommend people showing up to hear what he's got to say about. That just sounds like a fun talk. So yeah, where to find us on social media? you can find us at the Facebook main page, of course, the link is up there. There's also a Facebook support group page, and of course X, formerly known as Twitter, when I was at least moderately sane, and of course Instagram, all the grams, and TikTok. Of course, now we need to be on Threads. I mean, really, it's where
That's
people
true.
are going.
That's true.
So yeah, um, TikTok. Again, most of our previous RfRx recordings are on YouTube. So by all means, check that out at youtube.com, Recovering from Religion. And of course, the latest there again was the Pride panel featuring Glinda, Dr. Penn,
Yeah.
and Jason Friedman. So check it out.
That was a fun one. I love Pride Month. I love every month, but that was a fun one. Okay, so yeah, and other than that, don't forget also that something else we found is that healing can come from helping others, and many of our volunteers find meaning and purpose by volunteering with us. And if that's something you're interested in doing, we would love to have you. All of our services that we described earlier on in the show are supported by our staff of volunteers, and we always need more. And you don't just have to do those jobs that we described that might be public facing. We always need people doing those things. If you want to be on the helpline or help moderate the online community, or if you happen to be a secular therapist, that one's not a volunteer job, but you can sign up for the Secular Therapy Project. But there's also tons of behind the scenes stuff too. Maybe you want to help us with editing our videos before they go online, or helping us get on threads with social media. um, we also need web developers, and I've written this down. Our team of other web developer folks have told me the experience we need, and they're looking for people who have experience in the following: Node, Next.js, and relational databases. So if you know anything about that, please get in touch with us. We would love to have you. If you know what that is, you may be the one we're looking for. So contact us and go to our website, recoveringfromreligion.org, and click on volunteer, and you can read about what goes into volunteering. There's an application you can fill out. Someone will get in touch with you, and you don't have to be a web developer. That's just one of the things that we're looking for now, but we'll be happy to take you. And that's another thing you can do. Okay, let's wrap up. I am very excited to turn this over to our executive director, Gail Jordan, who recently got all of us to start thinking about these issues too. So Gail, over to you.
Thank you, Kara. This is one of those times I'm actually going to set my timer because I have so much to say about this. T, thank you for an incredible presentation. I don't know if you were able to keep up in the chat. I think I speak on behalf of everyone in the meeting that these are desperately needed conversations. You already know that. And the idea that you've created this book, not only that you've created it, but that you've put it out there, you're willing to share it. There's no cost to it. It's a wonderful exercise. We are so deeply grateful. I mentioned in the chat that we've even formed a death care committee. It's not quite a division of RFR yet because we're really not sure exactly what we're going to do with it, but T is a big part of it. David's a big part of it. I'm part of it. In my day job, I'm an estate planning lawyer, so I have a little bit of experience with helping people through these difficult conversations. And your book is so helpful. Let me give everybody a quick helpful hint about the book. My suggestion is to print it out. There are a great many better places to have a conversation with your loved ones besides in front of your computer. So if you'll print yourself out a hard copy, it gives you the opportunity to be someplace else in the garden or outside or on a walk or any number of places besides having to look at the digital copy of the book. So that's just my little tiny suggestion. I hope everyone was listening when T gave her number one thing to help prepare for these things, and that is to know thyself. And that is really important. And a great many of us are in this group, in this organization of Recovering from Religion, because we know ourselves, we know who we are, and we are making progress with what we believe, wherever on the spectrum we may fall. And I would add a little caveat to that, that the second most important piece is to have those conversations with the people that are around you. They're not going to be easy. We know that. That's a given. I will tell you that we secular people are not a whole lot better than religious people about getting to the point about this, to recognize that death is final. You know, religious people, it's a mixed bag for them, because they get heaven, but they also get hell. We don't have either one of those. So we don't have the heavy piece, and we don't have that other Disneyland piece of it. So that should make it easier for us to approach these conversations with our loved ones. You can start with baby steps. You don't have to go heavy to begin with, but you can just start talking around the edges of it. You can practice with a friend if you don't want to do it with your intimate partner. If you have one person who's going to be your point person when the time comes for all of this. And as an attorney, all I'm going to say about the attorney piece, the legal piece, you need 2 documents. You need a power of attorney, and you need a healthcare directive at a minimum. The wills and the trusts and all those are really important, but before the sun sets, if you can get a healthcare directive, and you can find those on the internet, that doesn't require a lawyer for you to do that. Healthcare directive is how you see your end of life care, what you want done for you. Do you want to be, only palliative care, or do you want, there's a whole bunch of questions on them. It's really important that you have that in place. There's an expression in my practice that the greatest love you can show for your loved one is to have your own shit together. When you die, your people, the people who you have cared about the most, the people who mean the most to you, will be in so much pain and so much grief. Imagine if you can assuage that grief just a little bit by having a book that says, here are some of the things that I want. Here's what I want done with my service, and here's what I want done with my body. And not only is it in the book, but you've had these conversations with your people. Let me add one more thing. Because of the nature of recovering from religion, a large number of us have folks on both sides of the religious spectrum. And the things that are going to comfort my children upon my death are not going to comfort my mother. The things that would comfort my mother would cause distress to my children. How do we balance that? Guess what? That's a decision that has to be made with you and with me and with our families, and we have to come to some kind of conclusion. What do we want our service to be? We certainly want it to honor the lives that we had, but we also want it to bring comfort to the people who are going to be hurt and grieving so much. So I encourage you to start having the conversations. If you can't have it yet about your own life and death, or your partner's life and death, maybe you could have it about someone else's. Maybe you could say, this is something that I have seen at funerals and I despise it, and I certainly don't want that. That's not quite there. You're not quite talking about yours. You're just saying these are some things. How helpful to your loved one to at least have that information. My timer is running. I'm up to 5 minutes. So here's what I'm going to say. Again, T, thank you so much. In the preparation for this, usually Daryl does our recovering, our moment, our RFR moment at the conclusion of our RfRxs. And he called me today and said, because of your work with being an estate planning lawyer, would you like to have that? And it's an honor for me to speak, and I'm grateful for it. But Daryl told me something that was profound when he said it to me earlier today. And the more time went on, the more I thought about it, the more profound I thought it was. And so that's all of my remarks, but I'm going to ask Daryl to unmute himself and put him on the spot and have him share with you what he told me about his experience with this. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. I hope you can go to the excursion. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Okay, Daryl.
Thanks, Gail. I was just telling Gail that I put off getting my will and some of this other stuff done for quite a few years, until my late 40s. I realized, well, I really need to get this done because I had 2 kids. I had a grandkid on the way, those kinds of things. And I look back and I thought, why am I so hesitant to do this? And then I realized, well, it's because I still have remnants of the superstition about hell and heaven and God and all that stuff. And then I realized now in retrospect, for me, the test of whether I really had gotten rid of all the religious bullshit out of my mind and my brain and my life was my ability to sit down and come to terms with my own death in writing in a document. And that was like one of the most liberating things I ever did, was sit down and do that. And it brought up all sorts of other stuff for me to have to consider. But I dealt with it, and I would not have dealt with it if I hadn't had that document. Hadn't had to deal with the document. It just kind of forces the issue. But to me, it was a test of, have I gotten rid of all the bullshit in my earlier childhood and adult training. Anyway, thanks, Gail.